So you probably have some questions. Where have you been? Where was I this time? I'm loath to talk about it, and I'm usually not shy about talking to you about these sorts of things, but I just don't want to dwell on it, in part because, as I speak these words, it ain't over yet. The short version is, I had some pain in a scary place. I went to the ER. It seemed like the pain proved to be nothing, and I feel all right just now. But subsequently, I had to go through some testing to validate the idea that everything is okay now. And although I seem to come through the testing just fine and remain unsymptomatic or asymptomatic, I guess is the word, I still haven't gotten the official results. They're taking their sweet time about delivering those. And so I'm in a bit of suspense. There's another good old radio show for you to check out. Tales calculated to keep you in suspense. Well, life is calculated to keep you in suspense, especially if your body keeps insisting on doing weird things to you, sending out odd signals that occasionally do turn out to be as bad as they seemed at first glance. Hopefully this is the opposite case. I'm hopeful of that, but I just don't know. And psychologically, that's been hard. All of this happened in and around Thanksgiving, which I do not recommend, would not repeat. It is not the right time to have some sort of malady and need to have appointments and attention from people who are more focused on taking off for the long weekend, having their turkeys, spatchcocking, what have you. And of course, they're entitled to that. Simultaneously, as the child of someone who worked in the health sphere and spent most of our Thanksgivings on the phone talking people off of ledges nationwide. And I'm not making fun of that even slightly. One thing that some of you probably know from experience is that when families get together on holidays, all kinds of friction comes out. I mean, that's the starting point for how many movies. And so you get all kinds of eruptive and extreme behavior, and sometimes a mental health professional, which is what my mom was and is, needs to be consulted on an emergency basis. And of course, she never said no. And well, you'd expect, say, your cardiac doctor to be about the same way, but it doesn't necessarily work exactly like that. Especially not if it's the holiday and the patient, that is me, seems by all accounts to be pretty okay. But as I said, speaking of mental health, it's been hard, and it really gave me 4 flat tires from a psychological point of view. And for a good portion of the time between when you last heard from me and now, I struggle to do basic things like wake up and get out of bed. And any of you who have experienced really severe depression, you know what I'm talking about. Well, I'm doing a lot better now. And so I'm back to talk to you, and not about that stuff. My goal for this episode is not to be melancholy. Funnily enough, I said that to Dr. Rick Mooring, and he suggested I do the story of Win Mercer. Well, to be accurate, he asked AI what story I should do, and the AI, whichever one he plugged the query into, said Win Mercer, the Washington National League pitcher of the 1890s, who was a suicide. So no, not consistent with the theme. As you know, the original version of the Senators was a National League club. It was one of those folded by the NL, the National League, in 1899. Mercer folded himself, I'm sad to say, on January 12th, 1903 in San Francisco, and no one knows exactly why. And I suppose now that almost 123 years have passed, this cold case is going to remain on ice forever. Maybe he was sick, maybe he had gambled and lost, maybe his love life had turned. All that kind of speculation attends his passing. But I am not telling that story this week. I'm not saying how he did it. I'm not going to speculate as to why. I'm just going to note that it was January, and that's a gray old time, a tough time for many people, and maybe especially ball players. As Bill James pointed out years ago, when they choose to take the lonesome road, they rarely do it at mid-season. It's usually over the winter. Similarly, I remarked to a friend this week that I was having during this difficult period that I was going through extra unusual trouble by my standards with the early sundowns that are part of winter. and trying to forestall what seemed like the inevitable response, something about, well, maybe you have SAD, seasonal affective disorder. I made a point of saying I don't have SAD because that would be a real insult to all the other seasons in which I'm depressed. And he laughed as I intended him to, but it still didn't work because once he recovered himself, he said, but seriously, you probably do have SAD. But this week we're happy, I swear. So we're not going to dwell on that. And by the way, Mercer's real name was George, but he signed his final note Winnie, and he pitched with pants on, and I don't know how he felt about honey. That's about the best I can do, I think. And I have to say that although I hope that this segment of the show will stay upbeat, knowing what I do about the story I'm going to tell you in the second act, which starts with some busted prospects and ends on a man named Bumpus, as the title of the show suggests, things will take sort of a darker turn. Not because of my mood, but just because, as often as possible, when I tell the stories that I do on this show, I'm reacting to something happening now, as opposed to something that happened to just stay with the year 1903, the year the Yankees came, the year that Win Mercer left. And the world of now told me what it was that I needed to refer to in the time of then. The time machine is always being baseball. And as always, the baseball of then has something to say to us about the world of now. For the moment, though, what we really need to do is find someone who's the opposite of Winnie Mercer. Someone who didn't take their own life, but lived well and happily forever. Not Babe Ruth. Certainly not Lou Gehrig, Christy Mathewson. No, Casey Stengel was done in by lymphoma 50 years ago this year. The anniversary was actually back in late September. But he was 85, which was an extremely good run for a man born in America in 1890. So his passing wasn't precisely tragic, except that every man's passing is tragic, I suppose, every woman's too. That's the human condition, and I'm not sure how we get around that just now, but we fortunately don't have to. And in fact, I still find some joy in his passing, even though, and I'm sure I've told you this before, so forgive me for repeating it, I'm so certain this story is apocryphal, but he passed the day after the 1975 regular season ended. And the story supposedly is that he was in the hospital in this final illness, and there was a ball game playing on TV, and they said, and now the national anthem, and supposedly he said, I might as well do this one last time, and struggled out of bed and stood for the anthem. I find it so unlikely, but so wonderful, and so devoted to the game as his whole life was devoted to the game, that I want to put aside my disbelief and believe that it's true. I mean, what better last words for a man who spent better than half a century in the national pastime? And I'll tell you something else that I feel good about. I feel bad he didn't get to take in one more World Series, and a great World Series at that, in 1975. But as I said, I do feel good that a man born in 1890 lived long enough to observe, and this was really his answer to the question, what would you do if you had to do it all over again? He said he would have chosen to become an astronaut. This was a man who could remember when there weren't any cars, never mind rockets to the moon and back. He was around when Pioneer 10 shot out past Jupiter and left the solar system. It's still out there, plowing the interstellar medium. And if Einstein was correct and nothing is created or destroyed, then somewhere, so is Casey. As he would have said, you could look it up. But where? Everywhere. As part of everything. And so you start your life riding shotgun on your dad's water wagon, which is deployed to the streets of Kansas City at the turn of the 20th century to keep the dirt from blowing away, and you live through an age of progress such that by the time you're ready to leave, or if not ready to leave, it's simply your time to go. It's possible that instead of playing the outfield, you could play out there. And if you keep your mind flexible and you roll with those changes, then you accept those things and learn to love them. As Stephen Sondheim wrote in Sunday in the Park with George, pretty isn't beautiful. Pretty is what changes. It's hard to accept that. Very, very hard. I saw this line somewhere, and I wish I knew who originated it, but it goes something like, there is no melancholy like that of an older man for the world of his youth. Well, maybe Casey felt that way too. Maybe he didn't. But he had also made money as an early investor in penicillin. So I tend to think he liked our modern world of vaccines and antibiotics and spaceships just fine. And by the way, he also liked the designated hitter, which came in when he was about 83 years old. Naturally, the writers went out to ask his opinion because he was the closest living person to Abner Doubleday, and he said, "Of course, I've been doing it all my life, ain't I?" By which he meant aggressively pinch hitting for his weakest bats. And that's what the designated hitter is. It's just a standing pinch hitter for the pitcher. But some pitchers are never going to hit this way, some writer whined. Which ones? Casey asked in return. The ones who can't hit anyway. He thought that managers might make an exception for really good hitting pitchers, which turned out not to be true, unless you want to look at Shohei Ohtani that way. He also said the DH would prolong careers, which did turn out to be true. Then he addressed something that comes up constantly in nearly every baseball game, something that I wish today's managers thought about more than they do. It came up repeatedly in situations in the 2025 postseason, as it comes up in all postseasons. "Sure, I used to believe in taking pitchers out," Casey said. "I believed in taking out other guys, too, no matter what inning it was. I took Clete Boyer out once in the second inning of a World Series in Pittsburgh before he ever came up to bat and got hell for it, remember? I did it because they had scored 3-4 runs in the first inning. So I put in a pinch hitter. Why the hell not? I'm behind, ain't I? How the hell am I going to catch him in 9 innings if I don't try to? It's too late to catch him tomorrow." The guy I put in to hit for Boyer was outfielder first baseman Dale Long, who used to play for Pittsburgh. The fella hit a line drive that was caught. We scored some runs anyway, but we lost. Remember the big smell they made about it? They said it was Boyer's first World Series, and how could I be so mean and take him out? He was referring to Game 1 of the 1960 World Series. He pinch hit for Clete Boyer with 2 on and none out in the top of the second, and the Yankees trailing 3-1. Well, think along with Casey now. Think along with any manager. Let's say you're in a postseason game, or even in a regular season game. Your pitcher gives up 3 runs in the top of the first. It is particularly true, almost axiomatic, that if it's the postseason we're talking about, that all the bad teams with the bad pitchers have gone home. And so it's very likely there's a strong pitcher on the mound, and you're going to have a hard time chaining up hits such that you can get a big rally going. In the case of the example Casey gave, the pitcher was Vern Law, who was that year's National League Cy Young Award winner. Say it's this year's postseason. You're Pat Murphy, manager of the Milwaukee Brewers. I don't remember if this scenario actually came up. I'm pretty sure it did. But let's posit you're trailing early. Somehow you get a couple of men on, and now the next batter in the sequence is Joey Ortiz, the shortstop, who hit .230 with a .276 on-base percentage and a .317 slugging percentage during the regular season. Now, I'll admit I have the benefit of hindsight here. I know that Ortiz in 2 rounds of postseason play went something like 2 for 18 and drove in 0 runs, and I also, of course, know that the Brewers went home earlier than they would have liked to. I also know that there are some hazards for the manager in pulling a player early in a game like that. Not only do you lose Ortiz's defense for the rest of the game, but he may be aggrieved at you for, well, the rest of time. You may damage his confidence. Now, that said, that might not be your primary concern at that point in October. Your goal is to win the game, and you can spend the winter sending very warm and affectionate text messages trying to restore his confidence. I am also aware that when Casey said that he was calling Dale Long off the bench, he was referring to a player who was a career .267 lifetime hitter with a .341 on-base percentage and a .464 slugging percentage. The dude had some real pop, and Pat Murphy's options weren't quite so luxurious. And yet, I think you have to try it. I think you have to try to go for the big inning. As Casey said, it's too late to catch him tomorrow. And you know what? That's a good theme for this episode. Rather than mourn what's wrong or be angry about what's changed, rather than fret about all of those reactionary types who would have us row backwards until we reached an imaginary yesterday that they fantasized was better because Casey hadn't yet discovered penicillin. Instead, Let's make like a deep space Voyager. The deep space Voyager we all one day might be, and think about the future, the vista of possibilities that flows through and beyond the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 354 at last. You've already heard about me. What's new with you? I do hope you're well. I hope that, unlike me, your mind is unclouded by any worries, and you are enjoying at the very least a day, even an evening, an hour, free of troubling thoughts. If you hear an extra bit of crinkle in my voice, and I realize this varies from week to week, it's really about environmental conditions. You'd think, having done this for 8 years, I might have said to myself before this moment, you know, buddy, in winter you need to run a humidifier in your office so your vocal cords don't dry out like some kind of beef jerky product. But I think that's what happens during the winter, and maybe some other times as well. There's a heat vent not far from where I'm sitting right now, and I think it runs and I just get toasted. I'm like an old ad for Lucky Strike cigarettes, and don't let Don Draper fool you in the first episode of Mad Men. That slogan well predated his reign in the 1950s. You can find it going all the way back to the start of Lucky Strike. Now, if he had wanted to take credit for so round, so full, so fully packed, so light on the draw, I would have accepted that. Or even LSMFT, Lucky Strike means fine tobacco. Those are 1940s things, but it's toasted goes back to the 1800s. It's not that I don't passionately hate cigarettes, folks, because I really, really do. I just love old radio ads. When I was in the 8th grade, my school district had something called the Virginia trip, your middle year of junior high school. You and your entire class schlepped down to Virginia, and you saw sights in and around Washington and Richmond, and you went out to Charlottesville and therefrom up to Monticello, and it was really a cool trip. They warned you not to wear your Yankees cap because some of them folks are still fighting the Civil War and you can't be too careful. And we went to the Smithsonian museums and, as I said, Monticello. We toured the State House at Richmond, which was also designed by Thomas Jefferson, as I recall it. But the really inexplicable dang thing is that they took us to the headquarters of R.J. Reynolds, the cigarette maker, so we could ride around a cigarette factory and be proselytized on how wonderful their products were. And I really wonder what the hell they were thinking. No one said, children, we're bringing you here so you can see how terrible it is firsthand. Everything they're going to tell you is a lie. Now, please, before we go in and they give you souvenir cigarette gear, which they did, take a look at this slide of a diseased lung. Okay, you got that straight, boys and girls? Off we go, you little scamps. Briefly, this week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote an impressionistic necrology, doing some quick but I hope thoughtful comments on 10 players who passed this year, thinking about Jesus Montero, who was finished off by a motorcycle accident at a terribly young age. How young, you ask? He was 35. He was born in 1989. There were 36 players born that year, still playing in the major leagues as of this year, but not Montero. As the song goes, he threw it all away. Or, I ask, did he? I struggle with this idea. Well, he threw some ice cream. That was part of the story. He ate some ice cream and threw some ice cream at a scout who pointed out he shouldn't have been eating the ice cream, not with his physique. But that wasn't what stopped his career short. He just didn't perform. Now the question is, should he have? Could he have? He didn't, so he couldn't, right? What you did is what you did. So how can we argue with it and say it could have been something other than what it was? And that sounds like a weirdly Calvinistic form of predestination. I don't mean it that way. I mean it generously, like, hey, stop beating on that kid who hit 190 in the bigs after hitting 330 in the minors. Stop beating on yourself just because some teacher sometime said you had potential. And speaking of baseball prospectus, I should mention that over at BP, we're having our annual membership drive. It's called BP 360. And if you subscribe now, you not only get the writing that I keep talking about, but that of all my worthy colleagues, our annual book, and a BP t-shirt. And I know one way or another, I'm always talking to you about money. And in this case, yes, I get paid to write and do some other stuff for BP sometimes, but it's also a publication I care about. I've been involved with it for more than 20 years, and it means a lot to me. And I think we do really good work, and with a larger subscriber base, we could do even better work. And just selfishly, I want my work to be seen, to be read by as many people as I can get it in front of. But first, I've got to get them to subscribe and usher them in behind the paywall. You know, when I was right out of college, I got my first editing job, and it was a reliable 9 to 5. It was just like the bank. And I sat in my cubicle all day, and I marked up pages for books, and I felt soul drained by it. I was kind of foolish about the whole thing in that I really wanted creativity in my work. And I found this, and it's fantastic, especially if, like me, you love telling stories. And in particular, of course, you tell your stories through baseball as I do. But it isn't regular like the bank. It isn't reliable. And you're always going around with your hat in your hand. When I was working at Yes, writing the Pinstripe Bible, I was paid well to do that, but I could have been paid more. And someone from ESPN who liked it because it was doing extremely well at the time asked me if I'd like to bring it there. And I said, well, what kind of money are we talking about? Money, he said, as if I had said gooseberries or Play-Doh or penguin dust. Thanks to Gregory Corso for penguin dust. Anyway, I very much appreciate all of your support, whether you're a listener, an infinite inning book buyer, a BP reader, or a Patreon supporter of the show. I just hope you understand I hate talking about this stuff, but I really do want to perform for you. And Baseball Prospectus is but 1/10 of my circus. So come one, come all, take a seat and thrill to the antics of Anthony, the dancing elephant. And now, to Act 2 of the show. I want to talk about a broken prospect or two. Some thoughts that were inspired by a recent trade, one that happened just this week. And I know I promised I would stay happy. Is everybody happy? But my thoughts took a dark turn at the end. And I'm sorry about that. I can only think of what I thought of, prisoner as I am of the flesh and bone apartment of the mind. But it's also true that I am happy to be back with you and just grateful to be hanging around in general. Although I do feel a little rusty at both versions of hanging around, both here behind the microphone and, well, in the rest of my life, to be honest, but I'm going to take a crack at that too. And the longer I sit here talking to you, the more I warm to the task. So let's take a quick break, and then on the other side, we'll begin with the Red Sox-Pirates trade that went down this week and follow that where it takes us way back in time to a pitcher named Bumpus. And I can tell you this much ahead of time. Why did they call him Bumpus? What did it mean? No one knows. We hang in the lacuna of the baseball year between the awards announcements and the winter meetings, the latter of which will begin this week. We've already had a couple of interesting trades this offseason, with the Mets and Rangers swapping Brandon Nimmo and Marcus Semien, and more recently, the Red Sox and Pirates made a 5-player trade centered around the talented but frequently injured Pirates pitcher, Johan Oviedo, and the Red Sox outfield prospect, Jostinson Garcia, the password. His name, if you have not seen it, is spelled Jostynxon, Jostinson. And he seems like a good get for the Pirates in the sense that whereas they've been able to put together a strong pitching staff, Paul Skeens helps in a big way. Nailed that draft pick, fellas. Converting a single minor league position player into a competent major leaguer has largely eluded them for the longest time. Think back over the last 10 years. They got Brian Reynolds going long-term, although he hasn't really hung up at the highest level that he's demonstrated. You might remember Kevin Newman, the infielder, coming up in 2019 and hitting 308 in 130 games. Woohoo, we got somebody. He's hit 246 with a 287 on base percentage and a 334 slugging percentage in 500 games since then and is long gone from the organization. So too is Ke'Bryan Hayes, who proved to be a very good defensive third baseman and a very weak bat. Josh Bell has had a 10-year career coming out of Pittsburgh, although he too has been up and down and is long gone from the team. They traded him as soon as he had a big year. That's two guys, one who's still there, Reynolds, and one who isn't, Bell. I guess of the current Pirates, Jared Triolo is a useful utility guy. Adam Frazier, who has been in and out of there a couple of times, had a few good years. Josh Stallings was brought along very slowly and won a Gold Glove at catcher when he was 31, and then they traded him too. It almost goes without saying that Pirates ownership is awful and handcuffs the front office, but it's not all ownership because the owner isn't sitting up in his skybox with his bow and arrow picking off prospects as they come up. He didn't kneecap 2021 first overall draft pick Henry Davis, the catcher. Now, the 2021 first-round picks have been pretty uneven, both in terms of pitchers and position players. And if you had to do it all over again, you might just choose to stay home. Among the position players, you had Davis, Colton Cowser, Jordan Lawler, who can't seem to get untracked in the majors, two catchers who remain good prospects, Harry Ford of the Mariners, who has played very well in the minors, but has been blocked by Cal Raleigh, or at least he was until this very evening when he was traded to the Nationals for Jose Ferrer, whose performance as Cyrano de Bergerac won him the 1950 Oscar for Best Actor, and Joe Mack of the Marlins, who has pop but a pretty limited hit tool. You should be seeing him this year. Sal Frelick, Matt McLean, Trey Sweeney, Colson Montgomery, Jackson Merrill, and Tyler Black. With the benefit of hindsight, Merrill is a pretty easy number one there, but he's had one really good season and one injury-hindered season, and we've got to see where he settles in, presuming health, in 2026. That said, there are missed picks and there are missed picks, and Davis has had 660 plate appearances in the major leagues to date. That's like one full season, and he's hit 181, 262, 294, and even in the context of blown draft picks, that's a blown draft pick. In baseball, player development is so hard and so fraught that you really just have to be happy as a drafting team if you can get a player that you selected to the major leagues. That's an accomplishment in and of itself. And whereas over time, history shows that if you are drafting high up in the first round, you have a better chance of getting a star out of the process than you do at any other point in the draft. If the player comes up and he's just an average guy, oh well, it happens. Not everyone becomes Aaron Judge. Even if you thought, based on the player's high school or amateur track record or college track record, that the potential was there for him to be that, it's not linear that way. It's just a guess and a bet. And if it wasn't that, then there'd be 1 to 5 or 10 even Hall of Famers in every single draft class instead of one every few. But having said that, whereas in the long history of the draft, there have certainly been players who were taken 1-1 first overall and failed to be even decent major league role players, they're pretty few and far between. And I'm talking about position players much more than I am pitchers here because the injury nexus for pitchers is so fraught. The history of first overall position players is, even when they're not great, they're serviceable in some way at least. I'll give you a really dramatic example. The Mets had the first overall pick of the 1968 draft. They took shortstop Tim Foley. With hindsight, we know that the really valuable players were a little further down. The Yankees took Thurman Munson at number 4. The Phillies grabbed Greg Luzinski at number 11. And the Giants snagged Gary Matthews at number 17. all-stars, all three of those guys, and each in his own way a very good hitter, whereas Foley was an awful hitter. So the Mets kind of missed, but Foley was still a good enough glove and a scrappy enough personality that he still spent 16 years in the major leagues. Unless something changes, that's not going to be Henry Davis's fate. And to contradict myself for a minute, I will say, to the extent that Bob Nutting's cheapness in terms of retaining players through their arbitration years or even keeping them out of free agency, as some teams certainly would have with some of the Pirates' better players over the years, if he's also skimping on coaching, instruction, analytics, then he probably does have some responsibility for the failure of players to develop. Like one really heralded current Pirate, O'Neal Cruz, 6th place finisher in the 2022 National League Rookie of the Year voting. He's tall, he's fast, he's got power. He was a shortstop, but he couldn't. Now he's a center fielder, and he can't. He also can't hit left-handed pitching with an oar. He went 11 for 108 against them this year. That's a 102 average. You don't see that very often. In April, he was pretty good, hitting .253, slugging .535 with 8 home runs. The rest of the way, gone dead train, 185, .278 on base percentage, .336 slugging percentage with 12 home runs, playing every day. Woof. It feels like something someone should take responsibility for. There should be a detective from some British police procedural asking, I say, did the victim jump or was he pushed? So given that all the gold that the Pirates touch turns to lead, someone has now brought them the head of Jostinson Garcia, as the Peckinpah film didn't quite have it, and he might be a center fielder, and he has a little power with over 20 home runs in the minors the last 2 years. He's also maybe overly aggressive and strikes out, so batting average and on-base percentage might be an issue. If things run true to form, unfortunately, they'll have acquired Jack Suwinski II. But there's also a chance that if they can't help Justinson get better, they won't make him worse, and he'll retain enough of his Red Sox schooling to avoid that fate. Just tune them out, dude. Tune them out. But I kind of doubt it. In any case, the real test of all this won't happen until the Pirates bring up shortstop Connor Griffin, their 2024 first-rounder. He was just 19 this year. He's already reached Double-A, and this year he hit .333 with a .415 on-base percentage, a .527 slugging percentage, with 21 home runs and 65 steals. That's across 3 levels. How can they screw this up? I really, really hope they don't. In the same way that I really, really hope that Henry Davis gets a change of scene or just attends some hitting guru's camp this offseason and figures things out sufficiently that someone will give him an extended chance to play and he makes good on that chance. There are only so many players with stories like that, and some are downright infamous in the annals of baseball history for their second chances going as badly as the first. I'll give you one of the originals. His name was Paul Strand, and his saga began just over 100 years ago. He was a prospect on 2 separate occasions. He came up as a left-handed pitcher with the Braves in 1913. He was just 19 and still in high school. Like a lot of young lefties, he battled wildness, but the next year he tamed it sufficiently that he played a small role on the 1914 Miracle Championship Braves team, going 6-2 with a .244 ERA. League average was .278. They didn't use him in the World Series. They had talked about it, but the Braves swept the A's in 4 games, so the opportunity never came up. The next season, Strand might have been a bigger part of things, but he injured his arm pretty much straight away and was promptly sold off to Toledo of the American Association. When his arm didn't come around, the plucky lad switched to the outfield, and he turned out to be a very good hitter, moving to the Salt Lake City Bees of the Pacific Coast League and a very favorable offensive environment in the early 1920s. He was able to take advantage of the lengthy PCL schedule to set some huge records, including making 325 hits in 1923. That was a .394 average in 194 games. If it's California, you never have to stop playing, including 66 doubles and 43 home runs and he made close to 600 putouts in the outfield, which was also a record. Now, here's the funny part about all that, about the way that things developed for Strand at that point. Obviously, his huge season got a lot of attention all over baseball, but most of baseball understood that he still wasn't a prospect. The Colorado Rockies were most of a century in the future, but it was understood even then that Salt Lake City was a hot environment, like Colorado would later be, or Denver, I should say. And there were other problems. He was about to turn 30, he was a hesitant base runner, and he wound up like a pitcher before he threw the ball in from the outfield. Everyone scouted him, and everyone came to the same conclusion, including Connie Mack's old A's first baseman, Harry Davis. We've been talking about the present-day Henry Davis. This is, or was, Harry Davis, who led the American League in home runs 4 times during the dead ball days. Mack sent Davis out to the coast to watch this PCL sensation play. He watched. He consulted Strand's manager, the old Red Sox outfielder Duffy Lewis, and Lewis himself said Strand ain't going to make it. Yet, when Mack took a look at Strand personally, he didn't see what they saw. And he sent, after most of a half a year of negotiation, 3 players in cash, $35,000, to the Bees in exchange for Strand. Now, somehow when this story is retold, the purchase price gets exaggerated to $100,000. But even the original reporting said Strand cost $35,000 cash and that the 3 players were valued at $5,000 each. So the most you can really say is that Mack spent the equivalent of $50,000. Adding insult to an already expensive injury, Strand held out at that point, and when he signed, he failed to justify the deal. He struggled badly, hitting .228 with a .254 on-base percentage and a .329 slugging percentage. His play in the outfield was untenable, and in June, Mack admitted he was licked or had made a mistake, and Strand made another final trip to Toledo. Connie had to keep sweetening the deal in order to get the Mudhens to take him. Strand's second and last chance was over. A favorite story about all of that scouting I mentioned, this one told years later by Arthur Daly of the New York Times. Clark Griffith, owner of the Washington Senators, had sent his scout, the old pitcher Joe Engel, to check out Strand. Engel gave the same report that Mack got. This guy is not going to be able to play in the majors. Griffith backed away, but then his pal Mack signed Strand, and Griffith started to wonder what Connie knew that he didn't. What did my scout miss that his saw? Fast forward to spring training, and the A's are going to play the Senators for the first time. Engel is thinking that if Strand looks good in this game, he's going to catch hell from the boss. He goes to that day's starting pitcher, which very fortunately for him was Walter Johnson, and says, "You got to save my life, Walter. Please, please bear down on this guy Strand." Supposedly, Walter Johnson did just that, striking out Strand every single time up. And if that story is true, I hope Engel bought Johnson dinner or a tractor or something. In the regular season, by the way, Strand went 3 for 15 against Johnson, a .200 batting average, with a double and a triple. Just 1 strikeout, though. Maybe Johnson was saving himself. As for us, I know we've been saving ourselves for a break. You look thirsty to me, my friend. You need to head to the fridge and grab yourself a tall, cool, well, something sober, I think, especially if you're driving. If it's late, why not pull off and grab a coffee or just a good night's sleep? I really do care. On the other side, we will conclude the story of Connie Mack's Paul Strand experiment and go yet further back to the man called Bumpus, whose major league debut included a never-to-be-repeated feat. Hang in there, won't you? And I'll see ya on the other side. Connie Mack, sulking after he had to pay Toledo to take Paul Strand, told Philadelphia Inquirer writer James Iseminger that, "I am through paying skyscraper prices for minor league players. I am going back to my old policy of getting players off the independent or college diamonds and developing them myself. Well, sure, Connie. You know, skyscraper prices is a funny thing in a 1923 context. The Empire State Building was 9 years in the future. Just then, the tallest building in the world was the Woolworth Building in New York City. It's 792 feet, which is almost 1,000 feet shorter than One World Trade Center. The Woolworth Building is now down at the bottom of the 100 tallest buildings in the country. In other words, skyscraper prices are relative. Ball players cost a lot more than $35,000 now, and a Coke costs more than a nickel, which is what it would have set Connie Mack back in 1923. The best part of this is that in the winter of 1923, in fact, a couple of days after he tugged Strand's string, Mack made another deal paying skyscraper prices for a minor leaguer, this one playing for his hometown Milwaukee Brewers in the American Association. That was Al Simmons, and he proved to be everything that Strand was not: young, a good outfielder, and a masterful hitter. I don't know that Mack developed Simmons himself so much as Simmons just had immense talent. One imagines, though, that Mack could have done something more for Strand, given him more rope. He wasn't fake. He hit .343 in nearly 1,200 games in the minors, bracketing that final call-up before and after. And he did it at places like Toledo after he was sent down, at Portland and Columbus. Now, maybe his fielding would have continued to be disqualifying, as it was for other minor league greats like Ike Boone and Buzz Arlett, who hit the hell out of the ball, but were felt to be too bad with the glove to play in major league outfields. But Mack could have given him more than 179 plate appearances to prove it either way. For one thing, he could have swapped Simmons, who was playing left field early in the 1924 season, and Strand, who was playing center. He ended up doing that anyway, moving Simmons to center after Strand had been sent off to Ohio. Simmons remained the starter in center for another 3 years. So whereas he wasn't Andruw Jones out there, he wasn't overmatched either. Now, here is where I'm going to make sort of an abrupt turn. This turn suggested itself to me as I was working my way through this story. I had come to the end of most of what I had to say about Paul Strand, and I was thinking I might talk about some other player who had a similar sort of trajectory. And then I started thinking about prospects in terms of their being children of a kind. And at that moment, I saw the news that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s assault on vaccines continued this past week, with his handpicked panel voting to drop the hepatitis B shot from the childhood vaccine schedule. For the last 30 years or so, it was recommended that newborns take that shot. They've already dropped the measles, mumps, rubella, and varicella vaccine from the schedule as well, or dropped it back. It's not all clear to me whether they intend for those vaccines to be eliminated or simply delayed, but you have to understand that delaying them past childbirth functionally will mean that the children will not receive them in many cases, because the time to give them is when you're there, assuming you've had a hospital birth, you're surrounded by people who can provide those shots. Once you're gone, there's no guarantee you're going to come back. So from both a public health point of view, for the population as a whole, I mean, in terms of keeping those various bugs suppressed, and in terms of making sure that the babies are equipped to go out in the world and encounter all the bugs that they are going to encounter as just part of moving through the world. The best bet for all parties is to get them in right off the bat. If you happen to watch the new Ken Burns documentary series on the Revolutionary War, you'll have noted that George Washington spent a lot of time wrestling with whether or not to have his troops inoculated against smallpox. This was a newish idea back then. Not immediately new, but new-ish. The smallpox virus was rampaging across both armies and killing soldiers by the handful, and he couldn't spare any. He finally decided to do it. And I bring that up purely because it demonstrates that the idea of vaccination, and smallpox inoculation was a very primitive version of that, is not new and has been pretty well understood for a very long time. We don't get smallpox anymore because starting in the early 1800s, various countries, including this one, state by state, started mandating vaccination. Later, in the 20th century, there was a worldwide vaccination campaign to eradicate the disease, and that virus has been locked out of the human body since the 1970s and is, with a couple of nervous-making exceptions, gone. It's still kept for research purposes in Russia and at the CDC here in America, and given who runs both of those places, that should scare the heck out of you. This is one of the greatest achievements in human history, and sparing children, not to mention the rest of us, attacked by that virus, or polio, or for that matter, chickenpox, and whooping cough, and yeah, COVID-19. These are big reasons that the United States childhood mortality rate has fallen from around 200 per 1,000 live births at the time Paul Strand was pitching for the Boston Braves to about 5 per 1,000 now. That is 1 in 5 children didn't survive to their 5th birthday. 20%. Now it's half of 1%. And a lot of that's left, that remains, the fatality that remains, isn't from germs. It's from guns. But somehow we've brought into power this cabal that thinks that's all a bad thing. We're bringing back measles. We're bringing back whooping cough. And no child in 2025 America, or anywhere else really, should be suffering with those things. Never mind checking out as a result of them. But here we are, winding back the clock on our children based on zero scientific evidence. And in fact, in the face of over 100 years, if not 200 years of experience controlling infectious disease. And thus we place at risk our children, the greatest, the most important prospects of all. I mentioned Connor Griffin earlier, one of the top prospects in baseball, if not the top. He ranks along with players like Kevin McGonigal of the Tigers, Sebastian Wolcott of the Rangers, J.J. Weatherholt of the Cardinals, and Jesus Madej of the Brewers. I'm looking forward to seeing Jesus Madej in particular. But, well, imagine if you had to scratch one of them because, well, he didn't exist. He coughed himself off the planet as a toddler. Imagine the pain of his parents. Imagine if he had been one of your children. There was a pitcher, briefly in the major leagues, who they called Bumpus. Charles Leander Bumpus Jones. Bumpus was a hot prospect for a moment, a long time ago, in 1892. He broke in with the Reds that year under player-manager Charlie Comiskey. You know we're talking about a long time ago if your manager is better remembered as a demolished building. Comiskey called Jones, who was from Cedarville, Ohio, the Cornfield Cyclone, and pitched him against the Pirates at the very end of the regular season, deep in October. He threw a complete game, he walked 4, he allowed an unearned run, but he didn't allow a hit. That's right. Bumpus pitched a no-hitter in his major league debut, and that has never been repeated. After that, though, things rapidly down-spiraled. It seems like he hurt his arm right off in 1893. He was pounded early in the season, and Comiskey gave up on him. Another wrinkle was that season was the first in which the mound was pushed back to its present 60 feet 6 inches from home plate, and not every pitcher was able to make the jump. Maybe that affected Bumpus as well. The Giants signed him and gave him a start, but that game went very poorly as well. He gave up 5 hits and 10 walks to the Cleveland Spiders in 5 innings, and that was it, both with the Giants and in the majors. His final career record was 2-4 with a 7.99 ERA, which kind of understates how bad he was at the beginning of 1893. That is the highest career ERA for anyone who ever pitched a no-hitter. Although I haven't double-checked that one, I do feel pretty safe on it, don't you? Bumpus was a pretty interesting guy. There's a lot of mystery there. For one thing, as I said way earlier, no one knows what Bumpus meant. There's some speculation. Was he a bumpkin? Did he bump from team to team? Who knows? He was an illegitimate child, and according to David Nemec's books on 19th century ballplayers, he might have been of mixed race and was passing at a time that being found out could have put him in serious jeopardy. Height, weight, we don't seem to have that information. He was a barber when he wasn't pitching, and he lived to a decent old age, but was ravaged by syphilis. And then there's this. He was only 23 when he washed out of the National League, so he went back to the minors and pitched until he was 33. In the late 1890s, he pitched pretty successfully for the Columbus Senators of the Western Association. And thus do we find this news story from his hometown of Cedarville on June 26, 1896. The 2-year-old daughter of Mr. Charles Jones, familiarly known as Bumpus, and wife, died Wednesday night of flux after several days of intense suffering. Funeral Friday. Why would you want to go back to that world? Why would you ever want to? You know what? I really don't care to know, but I will say this much. You better be right if you're going to lead that kind of crusade, because if you're wrong, the blood of every child who dies, every Bumpus's daughter of today, that's on your hands. I hope that unlike Al Simmons, that turn at the end didn't come out of left field. Should you wish to follow me to whatever field social media should be found in, the field of hell perhaps, you can do so at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com, and there's still a Facebook group. Simply go to Facebook, search on Infinite Inning. You can reach me there. Should you wish to support the show, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. As I said last week, I'll be starting up more player bios in the new year, and I would like to welcome our newest Patreon patron, Jan. Thank you so much, Jan. Gear of what kind? A rudimentary kind, available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. And finally, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do that, go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. Rinse and repeat until they finally give in. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Rick Mooring. It's called The Infinite Man, and Dr. Rick says, I have reported you to the AI authorities for refusing to do the Win Mercer story. Your intellectual property will be assimilated and without recompense. Ah, well. I will in fact insist on recompense, and if I can just steer clear of doctors for a while, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.